tie with Rangers. Laurie Sanchez hit the goal, which gave...
Playing without one, but yeah, all things, confidence at that club must be through the roof.
I mean, it's a funny old season. And
who travel to Aston Villa tomorrow. Arsenal play Crystal Palace on Monday. In the Barclays League, Newcastle...
A road to freedom as he sets out his plan to relax England's lockdown restrictions.
With that brisk wind.
A fashionable start to Sunday night on BBC One. A new look for Compo at 7:50.
The basic social contracts that your generation would have a better standard of living than your parents' generation. And so that led me to an understanding of communism, to hold in the commons unmediated.
Screen One presents an unusual and sometimes disturbing film marking Halloween. Over the centuries, there have been countless reports of ghosts and ghouls, but the line between fact and fiction has always been unclear. Using the modern idiom of the outside broadcast, Michael Parkinson, Sarah Green, Mike Smith and Craig Charles star in Ghost Watch.
What's up, you Halloween dings? Twin Sanity bringing the Halloween insanity, and this is the Haunted Television. As you can see, looks like an old school television. It's yay big compared to my hand, and well, it even says Haunted Television.
Hey, what's up? It's episode 2. When are we? I'm here with my great friend Rose Rowson.
Good pronunciation.
Did I do it right?
You did it right.
Okay,
yeah.
You know, I think I'm British, like 3 steps back on my dad's side, but I chalk it up to that. So
yeah, good enough.
It's
good
enough.
enough.
Rose is a PhD candidate in my department, Brown's Modern Culture and Media. Rose, tell us about what you do a little bit, what you work on.
Well, hi, I'm Rose Rowson. I'm from London. I moved over to the States in 2017. I just done an MA in Media Studies at the University of Amsterdam, where I wrote my thesis on magical writing practices in digital culture. Then coming over here, I did a bunch of different stuff, but then a lot of work about like British weird media events. I was like, this is going to be novel for the Americans. They don't know about this. I know about this already.
You Brits are just so quirky.
Yeah, I'm like, did you hear about this thing? They're like, no, I didn't. Well, I'm like, well, I made it up, and I'm going to tell you about it. Yeah, and I just finished teaching a undergrad seminar called Literally Occult, Hidden Imaginaries in Media and Theory. I was very annoyed that Tucker Carlson did not take it up into his reporting about Brown.
It would have been a really good, I mean, in many cases, it's like, oh, they're doing critical race theory, or they're doing communism because they're teaching an economics class, but your class had a cult in the title.
Yeah.
You're
like,
literally indoctrinating.
Yeah,
children.
I was teaching them about the devil and about Marxism. So I was ticking like...
To many, the same thing.
Yeah, many the same thing. I was ticking at least 2 boxes, so I was very annoyed about that. I need the exposure, but it's not this time.
Rose, first question. The majority of our audience, I'm assuming, is from the islands.
Great place.
Why is Britain so weird with a Y?
Well, firstly, because it's an island.
Yeah.
Like, we have island mentality that, we are the best place in the world and also the worst place in the world. If anything good happens, it's because of us on the island. If anything bad happens, it's because of everyone else around the island. They did it for us. Yeah.
I like it.
That's why it's so weird. I have a bunch. Yeah. If you anywhere where you have lots of piles of rocks everywhere.
You know, it's silly, but I do think that actually is a part of it. I was teaching in class this semester and talking about sort of, ruins. And sadly, no one really knew the reference because they're all Americans in the class. But I brought up like old Britain Roman ruins. I was like, why is it that we were reading a lot of Mark Fisher, a lot of this other, the stuff sort of out of this moment, like folk horror in film. And I was like, why is there this distinctly British version of this kind of hauntological horror, weird fiction that's I really think it's distinct from the American version in a particular way. And part of what I was telling the students is like, what do you do if you outside where you are, there are these ruins that are thousands of years old? And, I guess now we know where they're from, but 100 years ago, they're like, I don't know, they're just some rocks over there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of layering, I guess there are problems with using the strata metaphor, whatever, but that kind of layering of different times in space in Britain is, it's much older than here, in Providence, Rhode Island, even though Lovecraft tried to do it, but he just isn't as racist as British people, so it didn't work.
Despite his best efforts. Yeah, I have memories from childhood of going to see Roman ruins, taken by my primary school, and then looking down from the viewing level down to this Roman villa, Lullingston Roman villa, great one, and just seeing these mosaics, but then having piles and piles of school children's pencils that they just all dropped down. It's fucked up, man.
Into this space. And I was just this is, it's really fucked up. It's this is a learning experience, but we have no respect for these objects.
It's the age, right after Empire, I think. We have ruins too, but we're gonna just dump some stuff on it. So.
Yeah, whatever.
So you work a little bit on the weird, but you approach this from sort of a media studies perspective. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the things I'm interested in is this. What I'm trying to work out is this battle between capital MS media studies in the kind of more like a German or a European tradition, thinking about Kittler and Wolfgang Ernst, and the real problem that these thinkers have with forms of narrative history and storytelling in certain ways. And there's this really great part in Wolfgang Ernst's book, Digital Memory in the Archive. Is that what the book is called? I can't remember.
I can't.
Yeah, anyway, in Digital Memory in the Archive, Wolfgang Ernst is I'm really concerned about producing this way of thinking about technical media that isn't narrative history, that I am not doing narrative, but I am only human. And I cannot but help but to sometimes write these narrative histories. And I love that moment of frustration because he's there's not, whatever I do, I just go back to narrative. And the space that I'm trying to get into in some of the work that I do is this area of stress between technical media, what technical media can do, how we account for it, and a all too human desire to tell stories. And you have this in Jameson as well, where he's what do you say, the storytelling or narrativization is the I think he says final instance of the human mind or something like that. And I'm is that the law? I'm is that another horizon? like beyond everything else. I'm just like, it's just like like you can't help but tell stories. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is something I've been writing about for years, like unsuccessfully and successfully to different extents over time. This 1992 BBC television film called Ghostwatch.
The program you're about to watch is a unique live investigation of the supernatural. It contains material which some viewers may find to be disturbing.
And Ghostwatch came out on 1992 on Halloween night at 9:25 p.m., which is like way past the watershed that we call in the UK, like our viewers know what the watershed is. So it's past the watershed. It's a program about ghosts, about like, can we prove the existence of ghosts, live on the BBC, presented by Michael Parkinson, who for Americans is in Love Actually as well as being in this TV film. It's shot as if it's a documentary. It's shot as if it's coming out live. Obviously, everything goes very wrong in this exploration of the haunting of a council house of public housing in North London. But the thing about this TV film is that it's been taken up into the realm of like media manipulation and hoaxes. So whenever people talk about Ghostwatch, they talk about it in the same breath as War of the Worlds. They're like, okay, people watched this mockumentary. It fooled a bunch of people. The switchboard at the BBC got jammed because everyone was calling in.
Did people believed it?
People believed it.
Or at least thought something was up.
Or thought something was up. There was a telephone number which was displayed routinely throughout the show, and they kept saying, call in with your accounts of ghosts. And there were so it had an audience share of 11 million, which is really impressive, even for 1992. And between 20,000 and 1 million people called in.
Jesus.
To the BBC, over the course of an hour and a half. And like the next day, you have all of this tabloid reporting about how the BBC like duped viewers. There are programs on the BBC Bite Back, people saying like, we trusted you and you fooled us. We believed that there were ghosts taking over the airways.
Of course.
Why wouldn't you believe it? Because it's on the BBC. But my issue with Ghostwatch is the framing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was immediately described as this instance of media manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that something else is happening. And if you continue to be like, oh, it's just War of the Worlds all over again, I'm like, well, we haven't learned anything about like media specificity or like periodization or anything like that. So the way I'm trying to talk about this TV show is between like a fictional apparatus of the telephone network, in which the diegetic watching public call in and give tips and help the narrative progress, like perform what Bart calls like a narrative function, which he uses the telephone specifically to talk about this function of like pointing a narrative in a certain direction. Between that kind of like a causal like three a causal like 3-act narrative, and all of these people like all over the UK calling in and blocking this switchboard, like making this switchboard jam, like the telephonic apparatus then like can't perform what it's meant to be doing as like caregiving for the BBC. Like it becomes something else. Like, it gets alloyed between like the technical media and the story that's meant to be being told.
I'm reminded here of like the way kind of one of, in the States, the sort of canonical stories of television studies. An important moment is when JFK gets shot. And I think it's Cronkite, anchors, you know, trying to relay what happened in Dallas, and they're in the studio in either New York or Washington, I can't remember where. And I think they're getting a telephone. They're trying to get what's going on, but it keeps breaking and it keeps going out. And oh shit, you call him back. We got to figure out what's happening. And the way it's always read is this moment of like displaying the breakdown of the secondary, you know, technological medium. And because that's breaking, it really gives this sense that like this is real. Oh my God, this is important. Because otherwise, you know, the call would get through. They wouldn't put that on air if they couldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm thinking it's interesting in the way that outside of the diegetic narrative that you have here of the program, like that switchboard itself plays a crucial role in how this event was mediated.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes something else happen, and it opens up questions like about what narrative can do, what accounts of like technical media can do, and for me like also points to like the idea of like crisis in the humanities.
Pamela's just going to make her way outside now to our mini studio. She'll be there waiting to take your calls. In the meantime, let's go back to our main studio.
And Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Pascoe, what was your introduction to the Early family?
Well, I saw that programme that we've just seen an extract from, and I offered to help if I could.
When you met Mrs. Early then, was she then at the end of her tether?
Yes, I'd had some experience of a fairly violent poltergeist case in Heidelberg, Germany, so I knew what it could do to a family emotionally.
I see. Well, I believe that Mrs. Early's joined us now. Pamela, hello. Thanks for joining us. Hello. Yeah. Thanks also for allowing our cameras into your home. That can't have been an easy decision to have taken.
You have this instance of a finished narrative, something that's done that then people think that they can still interact with, like via the telephone, and call in, just hear like an engaged tone, like can't get through, or get, like if they did get through, get told that the whole thing is fake. Like there's no like breaching into the narrative that's already done, but which is coded as live. So there's no way of intervening. I've gone off from Crisis of the Humanities. Okay. But yeah, like when I've been trying to talk about this text, I'm just like, can we talk about this in terms of like narrative theory? Like, can we use this to talk about this weird thing that happened? Like, how are people using the telephone? Are they seeing themselves as narrative agents, or are they asking for something else by calling into the BBC, like reassurance, like some kind of pastoral care or anything else, just appealing to like this publicly owned broadcaster for support? So can you talk, like, can I be like, well, they are within a narrative, or can you say like, oh no, this is about like the function of the telephone as a piece of technical media, like it's about like the capacity for a network to hold like a certain amount of information, like it's about channel capacity. I'm like, you can kind of not do either one of those things, but then you also have to do both at the same time. So I'm trying to like wheedle my way into being like, listen, like, I think like digital humanities is like bullshit. Like you, like I hate it. Like you got like, they're like appealing to like objective information technologies to like analyze things for us. I'm like, that's not gonna happen. But what you do have to do is not like reject the idea of narrative completely as a way of like attending to things like information technologies. I'm using that like super broadly to talk about like television, telephones, like all of this stuff is information technologies. But you can't just be like, I'm going to like completely get rid of my subjectivity to deal with the technical media, but then I have to bring my subjectivity back to do this analysis of like narrative or like I'm like, no, we can like mix the two, but like the question is always how can we mix the two? But I'm on the side of the humans, I think.
Why is this happening in the 90s, right?
Yeah, this happens in 92.
What else is going on here? Because like on the one hand, I like this reading of like, it's not quite like the human feeding back into the technological apparatus as much as it sounds like kind of a presence by absence kind of thing and a tweaking of it that like really reinscribes it in a certain way. But, we brought up War of the Worlds, Orson Welles' Mercury Theater radio play, which is, mythologized as a defining event of cementing radio as an aesthetic medium and as a news like liveness.
Yeah.
And this is television in the 90s and a telephone in the UK. Like, why? Why is that happening then?
That's a really good question. I think that a lot of different stuff is happening at once, and you can kind of get to that by looking at some of the critique that is built into the narrative of the show. Like in this film, it's all about like the collapse of systems of support. So you have this single parent family, this woman, Pam Early, who has a poltergeist in her council house, and she goes to the council and they say like, there's nothing we can do about like this haunted house. Like we can't relocate you, like ghosts, like having a ghost isn't a complaint that we can deal with. And Adam Curtis wrote about this on his BBC blog like a few years ago. I can't remember what year it was, but about how this actually happened, like in the 70s and 80s. Like there was a couple who said, our house is haunted, and they went to the local housing authority and they said like, we work on a point system, ghost isn't one of the points. So we're very sorry, but there's nothing we can do. So she goes, like, so in this story, like, she goes to the council does nothing. She goes to local press does nothing. Goes to local TV, they do not, but by they do nothing, I mean, like, the family is ridiculed. Finally, this parapsychologist is like, oh, I'm going to research what's happening and try and help you. And then finally, they get to the BBC, like, the last thing, the most high up point that can somehow save them from this situation where everything else has failed. Like where, like academic institutions like can't prove the ghost is real and there's nothing that can get done. So this is meant to be like an exercise in vindication from like, BBC, like Mother BBC or like Father BBC. And then it becomes through the broadcast the whole nation's problem. And this, like going from like the 80s to the 90s in the UK, like we've seen like social services getting gutted, like by the Thatcher government. Like 92 got John Major. It's 5 years until like New Labour and all of, like that, well, all, fat lot of good that did. But there is, I think what this TV film does, what Ghostwatch does, is present this critique of what is happening in the UK in the 90s, where people feel like they've, there's no such thing as society, like they feel like they are lost, like there is no support system. And then I don't like to say irony too much because I feel like irony always gets used wrong.
I'm pro-irony.
Yeah, but then the irony is that this TV film, which is about breakdown, then suffers its own breakdown.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
Which then, like, so the support system that the BBC was meant to be giving through this telephone number then breaks down, so they can't give support. And then everyone's fucking shit scared because they're like, well, the BBC is breaking down, like this last thing that we had is being destroyed. And then even like, I mean, this is such like maybe a small thing to note as well, but in Ghostwatch you have this telephone bank of operators, and there are more operators in the diegesis than there were actually working on the night.
Because you can fictionally have more people than the BBC can actually like afford to pay to have sit there.
Yeah. And I'm like, that's wild. Like, how did, like, what were they thinking? Yeah. And there's this documentary about Ghostwatch called Ghostwatch Behind the Curtains. They talk to Sarah Green and Mike Smith, who were both presenters on Ghostwatch and had careers in like children's television and like just on the BBC in the 80s and 90s. And they talk about going to speak to people at the drama department at the BBC before Ghostwatch aired, saying like, we work in live TV. We know what happens when you put a telephone number up on screen. Like, people are going to call the number. And they say like, oh, you know, we don't expect people in the drama department of the BBC to understand that. But then the problem is, I'm like, no, they understand the dramatic capacity of the telephone incredibly well, like maybe too well, like how it can function to like develop plot or like what it signifies in breakdown and all of these different things. But then what they didn't understand is the other thing that the telephone is meant to do. So you have these like, it's like two sides of a coin for like the real apparatus, the diegetic apparatus, and the space in between the two things.
No, this is really good. You can't get back to that moment. In like, there's a version of it that's almost what feels like a 90s thing to me. And by 90s, I don't mean like the 90s, but like something separated from the emergence of all this stuff that gets filtered in stuff like the Stone tapes, right? Where in that notion, at least in my reading, a lot of the sort of 70s paranoia, hauntology, whatever you want to call it, is about that inability to know what's going on, but you can feel like something's going on.
Yeah.
Right? And by the 90s, that's already a lost moment. It's here. Neoliberalism is everywhere in the UK and the US. You can't go back. In almost in the same way, maybe this is the last question that I could ask that would really do something with this, is to us now in 2021, when we think about this, we can't go back to that moment. It's here. We can't undo it. We can, begin to start to do things to organize and, I'm glad that, Biden's spending more or whatever, but like everyone's saying neoliberalism's over, and it's like, no, this is, we're still in it. You can't go back. In the same way that you can't go back to when Ghostwatch first aired, right? You can't experience that moment of it sort of unfolding, just like we can't experience the moment of neoliberalism coming back because it's here. You can't erase it,
Yeah, and then like in the Stone tape, that so much of that is also about like affect of like what is coming, and you have this like the Jill, like the female character, who can like see this recording of this woman, this maid screaming, and she can hear her and she can feel it like all through her body. Then you have like some of the men on this team who, some of them can hear, some of them can see, and there's one who's just like, I don't get it. Like, he's like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Like, I can't experience it like at all. And then they're like, well, you're the exception that proves the rule about like the way that we can perceive this thing. But yeah, now like there isn't that like effective lag of like people like, oh, like, are we there yet? Like, are we getting there? Like what moment are we in where people are like, I don't think neoliberalism is happening. Like, it's not here yet. It's like, no, like it's here, but maybe there's no way of accessing like a general like affect of it, which is really how frustrating that you can't do that.
Rose, where can we find you? Thanks for hopping on.
My pleasure. You can find me on Twitter at Rose Rowson. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on my email.
Rose,
that's me.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. This has been great.